Hello, I'm Alistair McIntyre from Electric Scotland, and unusually for me, I want to talk this time about Canada. And why should I want to talk about Canada? Well, specifically, it's really about the Canadian Tourism Department. I'm not sure if you know the background, but certainly in 2004, a few years ago now, I actually was suggested that I might like to go up to Canada instead of going back to Scotland. I was in the USA at the time. And I did say that, well, I'd love to see Canada, but I don't think I've got enough money to go because it's a huge country. I mean, where am I going to go and how much is it going to cost? And it was suggested that I put a wee note in my weekly newsletter to say, hey, I'd love to come up to Canada. Is there anyone out there that might be prepared to put me up that's got internet access? And to my huge astonishment, as a result of that, I ended up spending a whole 6 months in Canada, from Prince Edward Island in the east to BC in the west, all being put up by friends on my website. I had an astonishingly great time. I mean, it was just amazing what I saw and what I did and what I got up to. And to be honest, just at the end of the 6 months, it was suggested that I'd had such a great time, why didn't I come back here and live? And I must confess, I hadn't even considered that, but when they said it, I thought, well, why not? Because one of the things I'd found is my money actually went a lot further in Canada than it did back in Scotland. So as a net result of that, I actually did come back to Canada, and I've since settled here. Now, about 3 years ago, I thought to myself, I should really try and do something on a Canadian website, because I couldn't really find anywhere specific where I could really learn about Canada. And I had the same issue in Scotland, of course, which is why I created Electric Scotland some, I think, 17 years ago now, or 18 years ago now. So I thought, as I learn about Canada, I'll put it up on the electriccanadian.com website. So that's where I started about 3 years ago. I have to say, even though it's very much a part-time thing I'm actually extremely happy about the sheer volume of content I've now got up on the site, which tells you all about the pioneering days in Canada, and I've got the histories of Canada up in all of the provinces. I've got tons of biographies on the makers of Canada, the people that made a difference and made Canada what it is today. So I've got a ton of information up on Canada. And I've also really made big use of YouTube, because clearly I don't know what a lot of the places look like in Canada, but on YouTube there's actually a whole ton of really great videos about different places. So anytime I've written about a place, I've checked out YouTube, and often there's some very good videos on the places I'm writing about, so I've embedded them into the pages. Anyway, one of the areas that got me interested was I've got a section called Transport and Industry. And that's because what I wanted to do was explore all the industrial sectors of Canada to see how we're performing, how we're doing in the world, that kind of thing. And I happened recently to see an article saying almost every country of the world is seeing increases in foreign arrivals except Canada. And I thought, Canada? Why? Because obviously I discovered when I came to Canada so much you could do. I mean, didn't matter whether it was like a winter playground, a summer playground. I mean, throughout the whole year, there was tons of things you can do in Canada. It's a huge country. So I thought, right, time to do a feature on the tourism industry in Canada. And after a lot of hunting around, I found two major reports. One was from Stats Canada, and the other was from Deloitte. The Stats Canada report was dated back to 2012, but fairly recent. But the Deloitte one was actually produced in the fall of 2014, so almost bang up to date, that one. And out of reading both of these reports, I obviously learned a great deal. And that's where I say I found out between the two reports how Canada's seen a declining number of foreign arrivals over the last 11 years. And I think it was Deloitte that pointed out that Canada actually has a 16 billion travel deficit. And that's a huge amount of money. So clearly we're failing to attract foreign people or people outside Canada to come to Canada. The Canadian tourism industry has done quite well, but almost all of it is based on domestic tourism, which is actually normal for almost every country in the world. Most of the tourism comes from domestic sources. Anyway, I decided I'd dig in a bit further. Now, one of the things that I am fortunate in is that I actually have my own stats that I can kind of compare that with. Now, bearing in mind that my target market, in Electric Scotland, is the Scottish diaspora around the world. And there's estimated to be something like 45 million people in that Scots diaspora worldwide. The largest markets for the Scots diaspora is number one is the USA. Number 2 and 3 are roughly somewhere between Canada and the UK itself, including Scotland. And the fourth most populous place is Australia. So these, you might say, are the kind of 4 markets that give me most of my traffic, although 21% of the traffic are from all other countries of the world. So knowing that, I thought, well, let me look at my stats for Electric Scotland to see where the visitors are coming from. And you might want to make a note of this to see the huge difference here. But in the USA, 44% of my visitors come from the USA. 22% come from the UK, including Scotland. 8% come from Canada, and 5% from Australia, with, as I say, 21% from all other countries. 8% in Canada didn't strike me as the right kind of figure, because I would have thought, as the UK, Canada, perhaps approximately equal. I'd even say that Canada's probably got more Scots descendants than the UK has. But Canada being at 8%, it was quite a low figure. Anyway, because I've now also got 3 years of stats from the new Electric Canadian site, I thought I'd look at those stats as well. And this is where I got the very disturbing trend from. In electriccanadian.com, 78% of the visitors come from Canada itself. 17% come from the USA, 3% come from the UK, leaving only 2% from all other countries. Now, to me, that actually told me the story that people outside of Canada aren't looking at Canada as a holiday destination, because clearly they're not trying to find out anything about Canada. And these figures, I mean, if you think about it, Electric Scotland 44% from the USA, Electric Canadian only 17%. Then I get 22% from the UK, Canada gets 3%. And only 2% from all the other countries of the world, like Germany, France, all these other countries, Australia, only 2% come from those countries. So to me, that's telling me that Scotland is not being, Canada is not being discussed when people decide they want to go for a holiday. So why is that? And I suppose this is where I first had to double check where most of the foreign tourists come from to Canada. And in fact, the top country, unsurprisingly, is the USA. But the next most important countries is the UK, France, Germany, and Australia. So again, I'm thinking, well, these are the next most important ones, and yet people that are coming to the Electric Canadian site from those countries are tiny, apart from the USA, but that's again only 17% from the USA. So I thought to myself, I'm trying to think back and thinking, well, where's the problem with Canada? And I do remember that I got geography at school. Now, it's a lot of years since I've been at school, clearly. But all I really remember about Canada is talking about the Great Lakes and a couple of the big rivers in Canada. And it talked about the prairie provinces, and I think about a bit about market gardening on the Great Lakes in Ontario. And that was about the sum total of Canada at school. So the net result was I knew almost nothing about the Atlantic provinces at all, for example. But bearing in mind that when I went back to Scotland after my visit in 2004, clearly I talked to a lot of people, and I told them I'd just come back from Canada and I'd really enjoyed it. And you know, I hardly talked to anyone that didn't say, oh, one of my family live in Canada, or one of my ancestors went to Canada. I mean, literally almost everyone had a Canadian story to tell. So clearly there was a great knowledge about Canada per se, but I got the impression that no one really knew about Canada. Canada was like a country. They knew the country Canada, but knew nothing about it in detail. So taking that in view, I thought to myself, well, how are tourism dealing with it? And one of my thoughts was, I started to go around the tourism websites. Now, bearing in mind that I wanted to try and get a feel for tourism in each of the provinces, so I actually phoned the tourist department of every province in Canada. And I did ask the question, how are you doing with foreign arrivals? Every single one of them reported they were up. And I might add, the Canadian Tourism Commission also said, oh, we're up. Now that's a complete opposite to what Stats Canada and Deloitte report, in that we're down. Why should there be a difference? Well, I'll leave that to you to decide for yourself. But anyway, that was the results the provinces gave me as opposed to what the government gave me. So now I was thinking to myself, well, how do they promote Canada? And I did learn they do a lot of magazine advertising. And some of the magazines and newspapers for that are large circulation. But that also means that you need a large amount of money to get a decent advert in. I mean, like some magazines might cost you $100,000 to get a full-page colour advert because of the high circulation they have. You can get others for maybe a couple of thousand a month, you know, but clearly magazine advertising is expensive. The other one, obviously, is to have your own website, but I'm thinking website. They put a banner advert up on websites, and I might add, I've yet to find any website anywhere in the world that has a banner advert for either Scotland or for Canada. So I just thought I'd make that point. But presumably if you do find one and you click on it, it's going to go to the tourism website. And the fact that we're getting declining numbers of foreign tourists coming to Canada, clearly those websites are not converting people into actually coming to Canada. Therefore, there's a combination problem there. That's their own websites and their method of marketing Canada. Now again, if I refer you back to Visit Scotland conversations I've had in the past, I did ask Visit Scotland, do you advertise on the web? And they said yes. And I said, is it worth your while? They said, oh yes, because for every £1 we spend on the web advert, we get £71 back. And I thought, well, that's interesting. I wonder how they know that. But they couldn't tell me how they got that figure. But later, talking to the Canadian Tourism Commission, which is our equivalent in Canada, I asked them the same question. They said, oh yes, for every $1 we spend, we get $71 back. And I thought, that's funny, that's exactly the same figures as Scotland was quoting me. And I said, can you tell me how you come with that figure? They couldn't tell me about how they came up with that figure. So, you know, bells are ringing all over me saying that I'm getting a lot of duff information from the Canadian Tourism Commission and the province's tourism departments. So I thought to myself, well, maybe we have to come up with some kind of innovative approach and test it. Now, bearing in mind that I'm saying that it would appear that if they are advertising with banner adverts on the web, it's clearly not delivering, because their sites are not good enough to attract more people to come. The best you could say is that they're slowing the decline, but they're certainly not reversing the decline. So I thought, well, how could I be innovative in making a tourism proposal to test the reaction I would get? So I first had to come up with a proposal. And I thought to myself, to me the best proposal is really good articles about all aspects of tourism. And I said those articles could be up to 20,000 words of text, could include high-res, beautiful pictures, videos, and even links to specific resources mentioned in the article. But I said to myself, I would put these articles up for free happily on my website. The problem is, probably only a few thousand would read them. Whereas I've got millions that come to my site. So my thought was, well, how do I get millions to read those articles? And to be honest, the only way I could come up with was to put a big banner advert in the header of my site, which is on all pages of the site. But rather than send them to the tourism website, I sent them to my site where I would store these great articles that were going to produce for me. And I thought if I do a 1-year contract with them, then each week they could come up with a new article about aspects of tourism in Canada. But I then thought, the trouble is, the Canadian Tourism Commission, I've quickly found out, are not the least bit interested in discussing anything to do with web advertising. So they were a write-off. So I thought, I need to pick a province to test this on. And as it happens, I picked Nova Scotia. Because I thought of all the provinces, Nova Scotia, New Scotland. I know a ton of Scots went to Nova Scotia, and Nova Scotia includes Cape Breton, where there's also a ton of Scots. So I thought, synergy-wise, surely Nova Scotia would be the best mix for Electric Scotland. So I thought, I'll try them and see how I get on. So I first called the Department of Economic, Rural Development and Tourism and talked to one of the receptionists there, Adele, who I will say was very helpful in giving me a list of contacts she thought might be able to help with this project. So the first person I spoke to was Jessica Curran, who I was told was the head of Nova Scotia Community Culture and Heritage Department. After a brief chat with her, she basically said, no, this is of no interest to her whatsoever. I mean, I certainly appreciate her blunt statement, because so many people will not give you a yes or a no, and they just fob you off, and it's a real pain in the neck. So I'd much rather have a firm statement, at least you know who you are then. Although clearly, considering the amount of Scottish heritage and culture that is in Nova Scotia, you think she would at least have been interested in going a bit further into it. But no, very quickly she said, no, not of interest. So that's fine. One has to accept that. So the next contact I made, which I was able to get through to, was the Highland Heritage Farm. Although when I say I got through to, I have to say that I have never yet been able to speak to a person there, so I've had to end up leaving a message on their answering machine. And as a lot of days have gone by, they still haven't replied to the message. Then it was on to an April Hannon at the Visitor Services for Nova Scotia. She also said it was of no interest to her, and that might be quite correct, because at the end of the day, I mean, I understand that her job is to actually run the visitor centres, of which there are 7, I believe, in Nova Scotia, and a couple of other places. So I could possibly understand why that might not be of interest to her. I then contacted Adana Edgar at Windsor Marketing. I'm told that if I was to do a contract like I was trying to do, she would probably be the one to come up with the content for that type of article. She gave me a very fair hearing, and I did email her with some of my background facts and figures and a bit about the project. She said she'd be happy to talk to me again. I certainly haven't heard anything back from her email-wise, and I do intend to phone her up again, but I'm kind of presuming if she hasn't replied to the email, she's probably not interested. But I'll verify that. I then tried to contact a Catherine Wadden, who specifically runs their internet marketing department. Unfortunately, again with her, I just get the answering machine, and I've left a couple of voice messages, but she still hasn't returned the calls. And finding this is a theme actually in the tourism industry, that invariably you cannot get the person you're phoning, and so you have to leave a message, but almost sure as fate, they'll never return your call. And I think that's a big failing, to be honest. Anyway, I thought, as I'm clearly not getting really anywhere with Nova Scotia, although I will say I'm not quite finished with them, so things might change. I also put a report down for the Premier of Nova Scotia, that's Stephen McNeill. He's been the Premier of Nova Scotia for some time now. But I thought I'll send him a report. Now, I'm not expecting him to get back to me, because anytime you email a Prime Minister or a Premier or anything like that, usually their staff will filter the emails, and whether they actually get to read it is dubious in my belief. So he probably won't actually read it, and I'd be astonished if I got a reply. But nevertheless, I made the effort to send him my findings, thinking that if he did read it, he might also be wanting to ask questions, you know. I have, of course, since tried to talk again to the Canadian Tourism Commission. I also thought while I was out there, because they're in BC, I might talk to a few other groups in BC, but got nowhere with them either. Now, I should explain that the proposition that I put was well thought out. As I say, the idea was to do a weekly, really good article about an aspect of tourism, either in the province or in Canada, with really beautiful pictures. I mean, I'm talking about someone that could do a 2,000 pixel wide picture, but we might thumbnail it to maybe 500 pixels on the page. So that would be a really good picture anyway, but if you click it, you'll get an absolutely beautiful picture coming up. And I thought we could also include videos in it as well. But as I say, to attract people to read them, it needed a banner advert, which would cost about $2,000 a month. So that's the proposal, but clearly that's not of interest. But I personally can't think of any other way you could take the web and really promote tourism in Canada that would work. They're all making use of social media, but it clearly isn't working. So, to finish off, I thought I would just quote a couple of things from the Deloitte report, in that they made 3 recommendations, one of which I might add was to do with investment in the future of the industry. But the first recommendation was to innovate. They said tourism organisations must respond to the trends transforming the industry. According to Canada's Federal Tourism Strategy, which is welcoming the world, organisations should diversify their offerings and create new products that appeal to new demographics and meet the needs of travellers from a range of cultural and geographic backgrounds. The second recommendation was invest in the business. They said Canada's Federal Tourism Strategy, Welcoming the World, also advises tourism companies to invest in their businesses, upgrading their tools and technology to improve efficiency, productivity, and competitiveness. And so, as you can see, there's a big effort about innovation, but from what I've seen of the tourist industry, it's hidebound. It's not changing. It's not taking into consideration that what they're doing on the whole is not working. And if it isn't working, you need to fix it. And there's no seemingly effort to do that. So I think we have a lot of the wrong people in the wrong jobs that are marketing tourism. And I think there needs to be new thinking. So that's a lot of facts, a lot of figures, a lot of stuff. Certainly I'd be interested in any feedback from any of you. But that's my take on the tourism industry in Canada. Needs to change, isn't changing. So there you go. Thanks for listening.